You're listening to the Bible for Normal People, the only God-ordained podcast on the internet. I'm Pete Enns.
And I'm Jared Bias. Hey folks, we're going to introduce our guests twice today because this is our first in-person interview and we kind of just got right into it.
Yeah, and it's with our friend Ken Sparks. Let's get into it. Let's do it.
It's a blessing to have these ancient voices. But if you want them to all agree, then what you're inevitably going to do is you're going to have to run roughshod over somebody, right? You can't listen to all of the perspectives and homogenize them without taking some part of Scripture and not doing justice to the human author who wrote it, nor the God who gave it.
We have today Provost and Professor of Hebrew Bible, Dr. Kent Sparks. We're going to be talking about the beginning.
Where does he teach?
He teaches at Eastern.
What a coincidence.
Coincidence.
So
This is Pete's boss.
Yeah, no.
We should have done like a mailbag where
I've been nervous all day. I just like, oh no, what's going to happen if I say something stupid?
So we're talking about the beginnings of Israelite religion, which is it's going to be an interesting question in itself. People might already be scratching their head. What do you mean the beginning of Israelite religion? Mm-hmm. So why don't you start us off, Pete?
Well, yeah, Ken, just maybe walk us through a little bit of how the Hebrew Bible itself explains the origins of Israel's.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to sketch it out in kind of an outline, you'd begin with the book of Genesis because God creates the world, and Yahweh is the name of the God who does that. It is also the name of the God of Israel. Yahweh's actual name is only called upon by human beings in chapter 4 when we're told that in the days of Seth, people began to call on the name of Yahweh. Beyond that, Yahweh isn't that involved with humanity directly until we get to Abraham, and then Yahweh calls Abraham, who's one of the forefathers of Israel, the forefather of Israel. And from then on, the relationship between Yahweh and the children of Abraham and Israel is off and running. As you probably know, if you're a listener, you know something about the fact that there were patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph, and God had a relationship with those 4 generations, at which time the Israelites went down into slavery in Egypt. That's a story in itself. At that point, the people were enslaved for several hundred years, depending on which biblical tradition you use to decide the distance. Sometimes it's in years, sometimes it's given in generations. And God remembers, because the people are suffering, his promise to the forefather Abraham that he would take care of the people and bless them. So he calls Moses to lead the people out of Egypt. And of course, you probably know there were 10 plagues, and these were ultimately successful, securing Israel's freedom from slavery. The Israelites went out across the Red Sea. That was the last time that they had any encounter with Egypt. The Egyptian army was killed at the Red Sea. And then they went into the land of Sinai, where they met Yahweh on a mountain. And at that mountain, they received the covenant, which was their the form of their relationship, their marriage with Yahweh, their God. And they received laws that, according to which, if they followed these laws, they would have a healthy relationship with Yahweh. And if they broke the laws, they wouldn't have a healthy relationship. They essentially break the laws immediately, by making a golden calf, an idol, which was one of the laws they were not supposed to break. Eventually, they invaded the land of Canaan. And at that point, we have a whole sequence of men who lead Israel, judges, we have kings, and the entirety of that history is judged really according to whether the Israelites follow the law. Whenever a king or a leader follows the law, things go well. Whenever they don't, things do not go so well. So basically, the story is one in which God creates the people of Israel, but they are constantly estranged from Israel. Right? And at that point, God is fed up, one could say, with Israel's treatment of Yahweh. And so he sends them into exile. So he takes what really amounted to the movers and shakers of Judean society, and he sends them off into Babylon. And this is in the 6th century BC. So we've covered several hundred years of history at this point. He then brings them back less than a century later. They're called at this point Jews because they were from the tribe of Judah. And when we carry on with that history, we're carrying on with the history of Judaism, which comes ultimately, as we've just said, from Israel and from the God Yahweh.
Right.
So that's the story in a nutshell.
That's the story in a nutshell, yeah.
Well, we want to scratch the surface of that, because just like a lot of things, when we start reading the text more closely, things get more complicated than that. So where does what we maybe were taught about Israelite religion, like we said, for me, it's like, what do you mean Israelite religion? That's just truth that Yahweh existed. Yahweh is the God of the universe. Yahweh always was. So how do we have an origin of Israelite religion? And where do we find it in the text itself? Because I think for some people, they think asking these questions are coming from outside the Bible, but it's actually, scholars come to these things from within the text as well. So I'd be curious, what questions do scholars ask, or what passages can you look at that starts to say, maybe this Israelite origin story is a little bit more complicated than just what we learned in Sunday school?
Well, one is the diversity of the text itself on these questions. If you go to, say, Exodus chapter 3, you're told in the encounter between Moses and God that everyone knew Yahweh's name, but they didn't know what it meant. I am that I am. That's what it means. So the revelation of the name is not the name, but its meaning. If you go to Exodus chapter 6, Moses is told, by my name Yahweh, the patriarchs did not know me. So here already you have two different stories about the revelation of Yahweh. One, that he's been known throughout history, and we're just learning his secret name. And the other is that he's not really been known by his name, but only as El or El Shaddai up to that point. The minute you see within the Bible itself two stories about the revelation of the divine name of Israel, you know that you're having to sift through. As much as it feels like a homogeneous story, by the time you look at the details, you begin to see it's not homogeneous. And there's lots of other examples. One that comes to mind is the text in Deuteronomy chapter 32, the Song of Moses. There's a text there that says, and it's a very interesting text, one of my favorites, says, El apportioned the lands, and he apportioned to each of them a god according to the sons of God. And one of those gods was Yahweh. Right? So that was a convoluted way to say, El apportions lands to gods, and one of the gods that got a land was Yahweh, who got the land of Jacob. Right? Now,
although some Bibles don't have that in there, right?
If you read that text, you're not going to see that in your Bible, right? What you will see is something like he apportioned the lands according to either the sons of Israel or the angels of God, depending on whether you're using the Masoretic text or whether you're using the Septuagint. And what happened is two different traditions, the Masoretic text of the Hebrew tradition and the Greek tradition, saw the problem we're talking about. And they made it go away by switching either the word sons of God, they changed sons to angels, or by changing from sons of God, they made it sons of Israel. Right? So two different ways to solve that problem. Interesting. This sounds like a theory because we don't actually have, we thought for a long time, the text that says that it's according to the sons of God. This is deduced by the text we have, but when we looked at and found some scraps in the Dead Sea Scrolls, we actually found a reference to what we postulated, which is it does say that El apportioned the lands according to the sons of God, and Yahweh had his portion.
So remind us who El is.
Let's kind
back
of
that up a little bit, because
Yeah.
you mentioned El, right?
And for a lot of people, you just assume, that's another name for God. Like we hear of Elohim or El. So unpack this a little bit.
Yeah, I apologize. So in the old Canaanite pantheon, El was the highest god, and the other gods were, so you could think of ancient pantheons or groups of gods as families in which there are multi-generations, and the god at the top was the god El and the goddess Asherah. That's in Canaanite theology. What this text is telling us is that the Israelite person who wrote this text accepted that El was the high God and that Yahweh was one of the sons of.
Mm-hmm.
So that in itself shows us that over time, because as you rightly have noted, in the Hebrew Bible, very often El and Yahweh are the same God. Over time, those two deities coalesced into one God, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you have El, Elohim, Yahweh, or whatever. They're the same deity. But it was not always so.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And we can see that in the Bible, not just by inference, by looking at, Canaanite religion.
Do you think that's weird? I mean, because Deuteronomy is so rather stringent about things, and it's establishing this covenant with Yahweh the second time around. And all of a sudden you get this thing in chapter 32. It's like, oh yeah, well, he's got a higher one over him. Is that a tension that was just sort of left in?
Well, the tension was resolved.
Yeah,
right. It was edited to take the tension out. Yeah. The tension is our tension, not theirs. They fixed it.
Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. So, one of the things that happened in the Israelite tradition is they had a lot of ancient poetry. The book of the Wars of Yahweh, right, for example, is the book of Yashar. These are ancient books that are referred to in the Bible, but we don't have them anymore. Mm-hmm. But if you look at, say, Deuteronomy chapter 32, also 33, if you look at, Exodus chapter 32 and 33, Exodus 15, you look at Judges chapter 5, you have these ancient pieces of poetry. Well, these are a part of their inherited tradition. They're not going to get rid of them.
Right.
It's a part of making the text old to include this old poetry.
Mm-hmm.
But if the poetry had theological ideas that being older were less advanced, they would fix that theology if they had to, which we can see in this case. You can see in action two different groups of scribes solving the problem, and a text that we found of the actual text that was the problem, which was, by the way, postulated before we found that text. Right?
Right.
Yeah. Which is always interesting when scholars guess at something.
They guess right.
And then they get it right. So they're not always crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But what are the implications? Because I just think this is going to be very new for people who are trying to understand what it is that you're saying. And I think we are making some leaps or just jump or assumptions that people are going to be able to track that what we're saying is, and maybe this ties a little bit to Israelite origins, because it seems like there was a group of people, the Canaanites, and they had a religious tradition. They had their own gods. And in this pantheon, like Zeus and all, we tend in the West know kind of the Greek pantheon. They had their own pantheon, and the top god was El.
Yeah.
And then there were all these other gods, and El had a spouse, Asherah.
Yep.
And then there were these other gods underneath. And at some point, I feel like this is what I'm going to ask you to fill in the blanks on. And now El and Yahweh are the same. So maybe we can walk through some of that. Like, how did we go from this other nation, Canaan, the Canaanites, having this pantheon with El? What does it have to do with Yahweh? And how did that get introduced? And how did those get conflated?
Yeah, Kent. Come on. Do that.
Yeah. So I don't think it hurts to shift gears to a different theme for just a moment. If you look at Greek religion, the Greeks had all sorts of polytheism, but over time, there developed within Greek philosophy this notion of the one true God of philosophers in the background.
Yeah.
So there is a process by which a person or persons or traditions can reflect upon the complexities of divinity and begin to assimilate it into a single core, a single identity. One of the things that I think helped Israel do that is that my view of the origins of Israel would say that Yahweh was a very important God for the Israelites from the beginning, from very early in their history. So they had already an investment in the God Yahweh, right? Yep. Yahweh, the text we just referred to a second ago, right? Jacob, that is Israel, was given as a gift to Yahweh, and the land was given, right? So that was
the Yahweh was like the local deity of that region that we find a little bit of a trace of in Deuteronomy 32. That it was apportioned to Jacob.
Land. Yeah, that's right.
And so Yahweh was that regional God in this pantheon.
Yeah, although interestingly, right, if you go with the biblical tradition here, it and this is one of the reasons I think this tradition has some truth to it, historically speaking. Yahweh is considered a god of the southern deserts from Edom or Sinai. Right. Nobody in Canaan is going to make up that our God came from the southern desert, right? So my opinion is that Yahweh was a god originally located in the southern deserts, and that the core of the Israelite population originally were desert dwellers. And so when they settled in the land of Israel in around 1200, 1100 BCE, they brought with them that God. And then it was only, he was really the only game in town. There's a scholar named Tige who wrote a book about the use of theophoric elements in personal names. For example, Eliyahu, right? Elijah, that's my God is Yahweh, right? What he noticed is in the Bible, and really mainly in the archaeological evidence, Yahweh is almost the only name you have. You have El, but of course we've already seen that El can also be Yahweh. So I think what we had is a henotheism, which is our way of saying they believed in other gods, but they had just the one God. Henos means one. So henotheism is sort of almost monotheism. Right, and eventually they got to monotheism, and that's probably a philosophical move in part, not different in every way from what the Greeks did.
Yeah, do you say that that's like of a development that we see not just there, but we see that development from kind of a polytheism to we elevate one now as it kind of henotheism, where we're going to acknowledge other gods, but for us this is the God. And then eventually that moves into a monotheism.
Many people in the ancient world were functionally henotheistic. So they would have a god of the family or a god in their land that was particularly important.
Right.
And they didn't really relate to any other gods unless, they had trouble and one of the priests came by and said, you need to do a prayer or a sacrifice for this other god that's making trouble for you, or that sort of thing. So there is a natural tendency, because we have, all of us struggle with attention. We have a tendency to focus our religious attention on an object. And so it makes sense that persons would begin to think maybe there's just one God and not a bunch of them. It's certainly more economical and easier to deal with just the one God. Of course, you then inherit the problem that that Israelites had to deal with was, why is there evil and darkness in a great world made by the only good God? Right. That's a different topic, but
you're trading
when
one
you're
problem for another.
That's the big
that becomes problem. The problem.
As you're talking, Ken, it just sparked a memory. I forgot who said this, but they described the entire, not the whole Hebrew Bible, but at least maybe the narrative portions of it, or maybe the Psalms as well, that the purpose of this text is to defend the notion that Yahweh and Yahweh alone is worthy of their worship. Not that Yahweh alone exists. Other gods exist, but and why do you worship him? Well, he created everything, Genesis 1, and he saved us from it. Right? So it's like an apologetic almost, and those historical origins are lost in that, I guess. But they're not entirely lost. They're there. But
you have to read between the lines, or take seriously a few lines, in order to see that the story didn't unfold in the straightforward way that the overall meta narrative, might say, of Scripture reveals the name of Yahweh in Israelite religion.
Yeah.
How does the I think this is maybe in the Psalms, the references to the divine council fit into that. Like, what's the religious landscape that Yahweh emerges in the ancient world? How would they have thought of that?
Too, like Job and Psalm 82.
So Psalm 82 was the one I was going for. Yeah. Psalm 82 is interesting. I think there's a sense in which if you're listening to this, you might want to go look up the Psalm, but it talks about the fact that it's sort of monotheism by war.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
There's the one and true God of Israel is judging the other gods like men, and he's going to kill them all. So, we're accustomed to thinking you get to monotheism because it was either always, it was always true, right? And that the process would therefore be, we have to figure out there's just this one God. Well, in this particular text, I think the argument is there's one God because the others were killed.
Yeah, because they weren't doing their job.
That's right. They were not responsible for their. And in this case, right, it's Yahweh who's apportioning the lands.
Things.
He's
Right,
replaced El as the God over everything.
What a mess!
And so, because once he coalesces with El, he's in charge of the universe. Yeah. And when the other gods aren't doing their jobs, he can just get rid of them.
So do you think that Psalm 82 might be like a hint at the beginnings of something like monotheism?
I do.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it is an expression of monotheism by the elimination of the other gods. Right?
Do you have a sense of when that was written? I have no idea, but I mean, I don't know if anybody really does.
Yeah,
is this exilic or monarchic or?
So here, my take is if you read Deuteronomy, Deuteronomy is already thinking in terms of monotheism. I know people wonder about that, but when it says in the Shema that God is one, I think what he means is there's just the one, not lots. Why is that? Because one of the things they're dealing with, so it gets really complicated here, friends, but the book of Deuteronomy is very similar in many ways to Assyrian treaty texts, and those date to the 8th and 7th century roughly. And there's lots of parallels there. I won't get into it. At about the same time, there were religious revolutions that tried to restore Yahwism to the land, first under Hezekiah and then under King Josiah. What we see in Deuteronomy then is not against Canaanite gods. It's against people having extra Yahwehs and Asherahs around the land, right? When we see, the reason I'm pointing this out is in the description of Josiah's reforms in 2 Kings, he specifically says that he's getting rid of the Yahweh high places and bringing the priests of Yahweh to Jerusalem, right? So he's not getting rid of high places that are Canaanite. He's getting rid of Israelite high places. Right. So when he says Yahweh is one, what he means is Yahweh is not a Yahweh at many gods. We have from Kintilat Ajrud down in the south, we have the desert south of Israel. We have these texts that refer to Yahweh of Teman and Yahweh of Samaria, right? They had notions that there were multiple Yahweh. When you want to take those Yahwehs and make them all one Yahweh in one city at one temple, that's the beginning, I think, of monotheism, especially when you can see they're also wanting to get rid of Asherah the wife. Right. So it's really a coalescence of monotheism.
And one of those inscriptions in Kintilat Ajrud, Yahweh does seem to have a one.
Yes, that's
Yahweh
right.
and his Asherah.
Yes. Yeah. So, in the
I just want to apologize to everybody out there who grew up on VeggieTales.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
And flannel boards and things.
But Pete, you're right. One of the things that happens is we're reading the Bible and inferring some of what must be going on, that Yahweh must have, in some circles, a wife named Asherah. And then we dig up or find inscriptions from the 9th, 8th century that refer very specifically to Yahweh and his Asherah, to Yahweh of Shomron or Samaria, to Yahweh of Teman. So I think this is the problem Deuteronomy is dealing with. It's trying to get rid of Asherah, and it's trying to center Yahwism in one place in the name of monotheism. So when somebody asks me when do people kill off the other gods in a kind of mythical monotheism, I would probably, it's unclear to me what is behind substantively the Deuteronomy's move here. Is it philosophical or is it more historical? I would tend to think that the elimination of the other gods was somewhat earlier.
Okay.
Part of the problem we have to deal with is we shouldn't assume homogeneity of ancient Israelite thought and a direct development of its ideas. We have to give space for, we're desperate. We don't have a lot of sources and we want to line them all up. But there could well have been people, earlier than Deuteronomy, who were thinking in monotheistic terms. It's just that, they didn't leave much behind.
Well, and I was even thinking of, I think it's the work of Ben Summer on the body of God, where he sort of points out that there were actually different competing traditions that we find in the text on where is God located. Are all these independent locations like, is God omnipresent, or are
Mhm.
these, there's one God in Jerusalem and these are all representations, and what is the Deuteronomic, what are the priests really trying to do here?
And my take on that is that there were different opinions.
Right.
Yeah.
There were people who thought,
Yeah.
oh, they're different gods,
Mhm.
and that's a problem. And there are people who thought, oh, that's the same God, so
Right.
it's not a problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Mhm.
So I think that gets back to the fact that we can see from the theology in these texts that they are polemical.
Mhm.
And when you're making arguments, that means that somebody thinks the other thing. Right. Right. So,
Right, yeah.
so a
Yeah.
big part of the Bible is that we've lost, in many respects, one or more sides of
Right.
the ancient debates
Right.
about Israelite.
We get
theology.
hints of it and whiffs of it at
Yeah.
places, but
But I mean,
yeah.
Job, what a great example of, a tradition that on the one hand is saying, this is retributive theology to the wall. If you're blessed, you did the right thing. If you're cursed, you're not. And Job is going, I'm not seeing it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Right. So that's an example of a text that just lays out right in front of you the debate between, say, traditional theology and more philosophical reflection on the human experience.
Mhm.
Right. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, what you're saying before, I think, was important too, about not thinking in linear terms of development, but of
Yeah.
things maybe coexisting at the same time. And
But I think that's, I think that's also a big shift for people to understand that, it can be overwhelming
Mhm.
for how do we approach the Bible with these kinds of things, because we are given the text in a certain kind of linear way. And then you're referencing like Exodus 15 and Judges 5, and there's these traditions that are older that get kind of plopped into these newer sections, and it's sort of hard to say in any kind of developmental sense, because they're put together in these polemical ways. They're put together for a specific reason, and one of those reasons is not to outline the historical development of these ideas.
Right.
Complicated.
Well, I mean, there is a narrative flow to the history of Israel as told in the Bible,
Mhm.
and it's organized to tell that story. It certainly doesn't manage to conceal all of the diversity that underlies that quasi
sanitized version.
That's
almost.
right.
Yeah. Right.
But you can see it's fairly easy to read it and not notice, or just pass with curiosity over the infelicities that you find.
Mhm.
But I do think that in the end, one of the problems we're dealing with is that texts are written linearly,
Mhm.
but our minds are networks. We don't actually think in a linear way.
Mhm.
And so it makes sense that if you're reading a linear text written over the course of 1,000 years by 100 authors, that's going to not feel entirely coherent and not satisfy a neural network, right?
Mhm.
But I think you have to begin, if you want to make sense of that unified text, what you have to begin to do is to take account of its diversities and let them be a part of a new neural network from the text.
Mhm.
I hope that makes sense. So when the text says, oh, Yahweh, we've known him from the beginning. Oh, Yahweh, we met him in the days of Moses. Or, oh, Yahweh, we learned about his name in the days of Moses, right?
Mhm.
Each one of those becomes a part of the network of ideas that you use to develop your history of Israel.
Right.
And then once you do that, you have to ask, what is God saying through this diverse, complex text?
Well, it feels almost like that once you see those threads, it adds a depth to the text. And I almost mean that literally, like it puts it in 3D. We have another dimension now rather than that linear
Mhm.
way of reading that in some ways is very exciting. I think for a lot of us, that adds some richness and depth to the text that makes it more interesting to then kind of start to wrestle with that.
Well, and I think for those of us who got into this from a more traditional viewpoint and then found it to be complex and interesting, it is very interesting. What I think it's worth admitting, though, is for a lot of people, it's not interesting and it's very disconcerting.
How dare you?
and trying to. I've had many people say when I introduce them to concepts, theological or biblical, that are complex, I kind of wish you hadn't told me. right?
Oh, right.
So,
because once you see it,
we have a diverse group of people here who are interested in the Bible. I think, our task is to help those who are interested to navigate through this. And I hope leaders at least take it seriously, leaders in the faith. And then also for those who maybe haven't thought much about it, even if you say, I don't really want to know about the history of Israel, but at least I know if I'm confused when I'm reading the Bible, there's a reason. Because it's not so straightforward. It's not so cut and dry.
Right.
I wish it were, but it's not.
Maybe a way of putting this, correct me if this is going in a different direction, maybe a way of putting this is that you can't really talk about an origin of Israelite religion. You have to talk about maybe origins and different stories that were brought together. That alone is a big thing to swallow, I think, for people. But it comes from, there are things in the text that just don't fit some other idea in the text. And we also have to deal with historical analysis of, archaeology.
It's not unlike if you say Christianity.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, no, we have one
Yahweh's
beginning.
religion, Christianity, right? What if you have in Christianity? You have Orthodoxy, you have Catholicism, you have strains within both. You have all of the different
But at the beginning,
versions.
everybody agreed. Wait a minute, they didn't. I'm sorry. Four Gospels. Oh, yeah, okay, I got it.
Right. So
James.
I think we have to get used to the idea when we use these big categories, they're very helpful handles. Israelite religion, Christian theology. But if you ask any questions about them, you'll realize that you're always grouping together diverse experiences and diverse perspectives under the rubric of a word. That's how genre works, right? Israelite religions, one could say. I mean, Judaism right now has many different versions of Judaism, right? Christianity too. So all we're saying is what you find in the Bible about Israelite religion is the same as what you find in all religions.
The thing is, I mean, I agree with that. We all agree with that. That's hard for some people to hear because they've been taught, well, all that diversity is an aberration. It's a departure from the one true way it began. And of course, our denomination owns that way of thinking, right?
Yeah, I understand that.
Yeah. But it's almost like, I mean, well, when you get it, it's okay, right? But if you're in the process of trying to get it,
well, it's how you get it.
Yeah.
Right. I think of the Bible as unique because in some way, in God's wisdom, we've been given this book to gather around and study and read. But what it gives you is a group of mostly men, perhaps a woman or two, right? Who are each related to God in a serious way, but a different way. And we get to listen to all of these wise perspectives given over the courses of hundreds of years as we do modern theology. And it's a blessing to have these ancient voices, Right. But if you want them to all agree, then what you're inevitably going to do is you're going to have to run roughshod over somebody. Right? You can't listen to all of the perspectives and homogenize them without taking some part of Scripture and not doing justice to the human author who wrote it, nor the God who gave it. Right.
Well, and not to get too abstract, but I think some of it that's hard for people to wrap their hands around is, I'm trying not to use philosophical language, but I'm going to have to, and then maybe backtrack. There's an assumption or a metaphysic of oneness or sameness. And that we, at least for me and my tradition, grew up, and I think most people in the West, that is the modern way of thinking of it, is it's about identity and sameness and monolithic. That's where certainty comes from, is to get to the one thing. And it feels like culturally, because of science and the way we think about things, we're on the brink of trying to think of a metaphysics of diversity or difference. And I just think we're really wrestling with that right now. It's like, what do you mean that at bottom, when you talk about Christian theology, we can't trace it back to the one right way, that there has always been diversity, and that doesn't negate or dilute truth, but can actually amplify it.
Yeah, I think the word certainty is interesting. I don't know if you've ever heard, but some people say it's a sin.
I have heard about that.
That's a
over
new thing
and over
me.
Again.
But the sin of certainty, it is a sin to demand a certainty such as only God has. It is the one could say the sin of Job. Right? Because Job is sinless, except for the end, God reprimands him for thinking he knows everything. Right? I think part of it is understanding how certainty does work in a positive way, and this can be sometimes helpful. John Henry Newman in Grammar of Assent has an interesting discussion on what certainty is, and he says certainty is not an epistemic destination; it's an epistemic function. That is, we have to stop asking questions endlessly. Or we'll just always be perseverating on our decisions, right? So certainty is sort of the mind closes before it has all the evidence it needs as a function, right? So yes, I have certainty. I mean, I believe in God. I wake up every morning and I say, how can I follow Jesus and love everybody better, including my enemies? Now, that's kind of, I've closed in on that. If you ask me, is it possible that God doesn't exist? Well, I mean, when I look at the Holocaust, it's sure, I get the question, right? So there's a difference between certainty as a destination, that is, I know for sure incorrigibly forever, and certainty as an operational reality, which we all have to have. I think what is the problem is people need to, on the one hand, I think it's healthy to give up that notion of divine positioning certainty. On the other hand, it's useful to realize you're going to need to have closure, but you have to be open enough to grow, because here's the thing. If you care about spiritual growth, which I do, it inevitably involves an imagination in which you imagine yourself in the world as different than it is. If you close the door in a certain kind of incorrigible way, you cannot grow spiritually. And if you say, I'm going to close my mind to the fact that this Bible verse says something, that's not any really fundamentally different from saying, I'm going to close my mind to God might be saying something. So, I think that there is a relationship often between belief in that kind of foundationalism in scripture and theology and a lack of spiritual maturity, because you're unable to grow beyond the bounds that you've created in your mind.
Yeah. And I think this discussion we're having about Israelite religion to show the messiness of it, the diversity of it, the benefit is that you have to grow to get it. And you have to grow to accept the Bible that we have and the stories that are told there, and not make assumptions about how, well, since God wrote it, they all have to say the same thing. Nobody can disagree with you. And that's not healthy. I mean, it's patently, I mean, too strong to say, it's patently false. Just it's hard to read the Bible and say, well, everybody's on the same exact page here. They're not meant to be. It's an anthology.
Well, and if you get to the point as you have and I have, and you realize the diversity of Scripture on many issues, including the origins of Israelite religion, is palpably obvious, then it becomes, why am I not listening? And then it becomes, again, a spiritual thing.
Yeah.
Because if God has created this book in such a way as to preserve the diversity of opinion in it, then I, by all means, want, as a part of my theology, to view, accept, and metabolize that diversity. Now, I'm not saying what we do with it or how we metabolize it, but it's there. And to pretend like it's not by playing kind of alchemistic games to make differences look the same, I don't think that's healthy intellectually. And if it's not healthy intellectually, it's probably not healthy spiritually.
And the study of Israel, the origins of Israelite religion, is one avenue that forces us to have that conversation.
It does, but what it can also do is it can help us appreciate the value of process.
Yeah,
right?
I meant that. Yeah,
when you look at human evolution, right? What an incredible story!
Right,
that we were living in a world. We weren't living in the world. That there was a world where nobody was living, nothing was living, and then the first, single cell bacteria appear, and over time, this becomes sentient beings. What a story, right? Instead of zap, but a whole story. How did we get to the monotheism that we know and love as Christians? Well, we got there through a process. And the fact that that's true means that for each one of us, no less than Israel, we have a process. We have to grow. We have to walk the journey. We have to navigate the diversity. We have to make decisions, right? So what the Bible's giving us is kind of an example of how Israel walked it, how Paul walked it, how early Christians walked this walk, and that diversity is a part of that. So it's a template.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good way of saying that. And I think Kierkegaard was fond of saying, like, we can't, because it's a process and because it's a journey, it's not something that can be downloaded to us. We have to walk it. And so instead of seeing the Bible as this thing that helps us skip over the process, it actually is just modeling.
It's pushing you to do the process.
Yes, exactly.
That's what I think one of the things I've always loved about the work you guys do here on the Bible for Normal People is you're pushing us to take seriously that process. I don't think it's just because, we're biblical scholars and we want to be biblical scholars. It's also about the church, about spiritual formation, about, brokenness and about healing. All this is a part of the work you do. And that's what I love about it.
Well, I think we can just wrap it up, but we were just waiting for Ken to say something
Anything
nice.
else you want to say about us?
I love you guys.
Well, I think that, again, for people have to get there. And that's the tricky part of how, teaching college students, first-year college students. You ever notice this? Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit and trying to ease them into a way to accept the implications of looking at, say, the diversity of, Israelite origins and when and where did Yahweh pop up and how and where is he from and all that stuff. And I think the trick is, as we maybe move to the future, is to try to find ways to communicate that in ways that is exactly what you're saying, Kent. There's a spiritual value to doing it that you will not get anywhere else than that process. But the Bible's supposed to tell me what to do. Who in the world ever told you that?
Well,
right?
yeah. If someone's going to tell you
what
what to do, it's going to be God telling you what to do in God's way, which includes through personal reflection, through relationships, through scripture, through
that's
tradition.
Sinful. That's sinful. It's just the Bible.
Otherwise, God is really poor at communicating.
That's right.
Right. Either right. I mean, if God were so successful at communication to overcome that, we would all just agree.
Yeah.
God has created an economy where we have to navigate through different voices and perspective. And that's how we land in different places.
Right.
Well, and again, it problematizes the idea that getting somewhere or getting it right is actually even the destination. That maybe that's not even the point.
Triumphalism is the death of spirituality. Anytime you think I've figured out the secret, I've arrived, right? You're dead.
Sin of certainty.
Yeah, sin of certainty. Yeah, that's right.
Well, it's whatever.
Somebody should write about it.
Yeah,
somebody should write a better book about it. I think.
Well, I think thanks for coming on, Ken, and for being here. This is our first in-person interview, which is great.
Yeah,
it was great.
But I think I just want to end by, I think that was a wonderful benediction to talk about how these things that feel so esoteric and feel so nerdy can actually be one of the ways that we enter into conversations about spiritual formation and our growth and how and to your point, I appreciate that you recognize that is what we're about. We're about not leaving it out here as nerdy fact in our heads, but how does that actually change how we think about faith and how we think about faith expression? So
agreed.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thanks to everyone who supports the show. If you want to support what we do, there are 3 ways you can do it. 1, if you just want to give a little money, go to thebiblefornormalpeople.com/give.
And if you want to support us and want access to our library of over 50 classes, plus bonus episodes, an ad-free podcast feed, and a thoughtful community of people asking tough questions about the Bible and faith, you can become a member of our online community, the Society of Normal People, at thebiblefornormalpeople.com/join.
And lastly, it goes a long way if you just wanted to rate the podcast, leave a review, and tell others about our show. In addition, you can let us know what you thought about the episode by emailing us at info@thebiblefornormalpeople.com.
You've just made it through another episode of The Bible for Normal People. Don't forget you can catch our other show, Faith for Normal People, in the same feed wherever you get your podcasts. This episode was brought to you by the Bible for Normal People team.
Thank you.
Thanks, bud.
Bud. Is that any way to talk to your boss or superior, bud? Disrespect.
I could have called him something else.
That was fun.
Yeah, is the camera going to be on both of us? I have to look interested? Okay. It's too early in the morning. What?
No, that's fine. That works. That's fine.
Brittany won't like it. Hi, Brittany. Brittany, you're going to...
What did you not like? You can't just laugh at us.
You're going to like this, Brittany.
Well, I mean, obviously, you're kind of talking. I don't think that's...
No, it's just us.
Yes. All right.
Okay,
Good.
great. I'm good with
Done.
that.
Don't be so anal, Joel. Seriously. God.